When the gunfire stopped and the snow ran red, only two figures remained standing on Dead Man's Ridge, a scarred mountain ghost and the baker who refused to die. This is the story of Elias Creed and Mara Whitlock, the most dangerous marriage the Wyoming Highlands ever witnessed. 5 brides before her had fled screaming. She stayed and turned hell into a fortress. If you want to know how a woman with nothing but flour-dusted hands brought armed men to their knees, stay until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this legend travels. The stagecoach rattled to a stop in a town that looked like it had been carved out of spite and frozen into permanence. Coldwater wasn't on most maps, and the people who lived there preferred it that way. It was a place where winters lasted 8 months, where the wind had teeth, and where strangers were measured not by their words, but by how long they could endure the silence. Mara Whitlock stepped down onto the packed dirt road, her heavy skirts brushing against the side of the coach. She was a large woman, broad-shouldered, thick through the waist and hips, with strong hands that had kneaded thousands of loaves of bread back in Boston. Her dark hair was pulled into a tight bun, and her face, though plain by the standards of the fashion plates she'd seen in shop windows, carried a look of stubborn resolve that made men twice her size take a step back. The driver handed down her single trunk without a word. He didn't meet her eyes. Nobody did. She stood there in the middle of the street, the only sound the creak of the coach springs as the driver climbed back up to his seat. A few faces appeared in windows, pale, curious, already writing her story before she'd lived a single page of it. "You the one for Creed?" a voice called out. Mara turned. The man who'd spoken was standing in the doorway of what looked like a general store, his arms crossed over a stained apron. He was older, grizzled, with the kind of face that had seen too much and cared too little. "I am," Mara said. Her voice was steady, clear. She didn't ask questions. She didn't flinch. The man grunted. "You're the 6th. "I know. The others didn't last a week. I'm not the others." The man studied her for a long moment, then spat into the dirt. "Horses tied up behind the store, trails marked. You can read a map?" "I can." "Then you won't get lost." He paused, his expression darkening. "Whether you want to come back, that's another question." Mara didn't respond. She simply walked to the back of the store, found the horse, a sturdy mare with suspicious eyes, and began strapping her trunk to the saddle. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency. She'd prepared for this. She'd prepared for worse, because Mara Whitlock hadn't come to the Wyoming Highlands looking for love, or even companionship. She'd come because she was being hunted, and Dead Man's Ridge was the only place on Earth cruel enough to keep worse men away. The trail up the mountain was narrow, steep, and lined with pine trees so dense they blocked out the sky. The air grew colder with every mile, and the wind picked up until it howled through the branches like something alive and angry. Mara pulled her shawl tighter and kept riding. She'd read the letters, brief, blunt, written in a hand that looked like it had been carved into the paper rather than penned. Elias Creed wasn't looking for a wife in any traditional sense. He needed someone who could work, who wouldn't complain, and who understood that life on the ridge meant isolation, silence, and survival. Romance wasn't mentioned. Neither was kindness. That suited Mara just fine. By the time she reached the cabin, the sun was setting, casting the ridge in shades of blood and shadow. The structure itself was more fortress than home, rough-hewn logs, a stone chimney leaking thin smoke, windows so narrow they looked like arrow slits. The surrounding land was raw and unforgiving. Rocks, scrub brush, a few skeletal trees that looked like they'd been struck by lightning and refused to fall. Mara dismounted, her legs stiff from the ride. She tied the horse to a post near what might have been a barn, or might have been a shed that had collapsed and been rebuilt a dozen times. She took a breath, steadied herself, and walked to the door. Before she could knock, it opened. The man standing in the doorway was enormous. Elias Creed stood at least 6.5 feet tall, with shoulders broad enough to fill the frame. His hair was long and dark, streaked with gray, pulled back carelessly. His face was all hard angles, sharp cheekbones, a broken nose that had healed crooked, a jaw covered in a thick, unkempt beard. But it was his eyes that stopped her. They were pale, cold, and empty of anything resembling welcome. A scar ran from his left temple down to his jaw, thick and ragged. the kind of wound that should have killed him. He looked her up and down, his expression unreadable. "You're bigger than the last one," he said finally. His voice was low, rough, like gravel scraped over iron. Mara met his gaze without flinching. "And you're exactly what I expected." His eyes narrowed slightly. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he stepped aside. "Get in. Door stays shut after dark." Mara walked past him into the cabin, and the smell hit her immediately. Smoke, sweat, old leather, and something darker, something feral. The interior was a single large room, a stone fireplace on one wall, a rough-built table and chairs, a bed in the corner that looked like it hadn't seen fresh linens in years. Furs were piled on the floor, tools hung on the walls, axes, knives, traps. A rifle leaned near the door. It was a place built for function, not comfort. A place that didn't care if you lived or died. Elias shut the door behind her, the sound heavy and final. "You can sleep there," he said, nodding toward a corner near the fireplace. "Don't touch my things. Don't go outside after dark. Don't ask questions." Mara set her bag down slowly. "What about food? You cook it, I hunt it. And if I need something from town, you don't." She turned to face him fully. "I didn't come here to be a prisoner." Elias stepped closer, and the space between them seemed to shrink. He towered over her, his presence like a wall of stone. "You came here because you had nowhere else to go. Same as the others. Don't pretend this is something it's not." Mara didn't back down. "I'm not pretending anything, but if you think I'm going to cower in the corner and wait for you to decide I'm useful, you're wrong." For the first time, something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe, or the faintest hint of curiosity. But it was gone as quickly as it came. "We'll see," he said quietly. Then he turned, grabbed his rifle, and walked out into the night without another word. Mara didn't sleep that first night. She sat by the fire, wrapped in her shawl, and listened to the sounds of the mountain, the wind, the creak of the trees, the distant howl of something that might have been a wolf. Her mind churned through the choices that had brought her here, each one a stone in the wall she'd built between herself and the life she'd left behind. Boston seemed like another world now. The bakery she'd run with her brother, the modest success they'd built, the trust she'd placed in him, all of it had crumbled in a single night. She could still see his face, cold and calculating, as he told her what he'd done. He'd embezzled funds, framed her for it, and sold her out to a man named Victor Crane, a financier with connections that reached into every corrupt corner of the city. Crane didn't forgive debts. He didn't negotiate. He collected. Mara had run. She'd sold everything she could, changed her name, and answered the first mail-order bride advertisement that promised distance and anonymity. She hadn't cared what kind of man she'd be marrying. She only cared that he lived somewhere no one would think to look. Now, sitting in this cold, dark cabin, she wondered if she'd traded one kind of danger for another. But when the door opened hours later, and Elias stepped back inside, carrying the carcass of a deer over his shoulder like it weighed nothing, Mara made a decision. She wasn't going to be afraid of him. She was going to survive him. The next morning, Mara woke to frost on the inside of the windows and Elias already gone. She stood, stretched the stiffness from her body, and surveyed the cabin in the daylight. It was worse than she'd thought. The floor was covered in dirt, dried blood, and God knew what else. The furs smelled like rot. The table was sticky with old grease. The fireplace was caked with ash that hadn't been cleared in months, maybe years. And the corner where Elias had pointed for her to sleep, it was a bare patch of floor with no blanket, no pillow, nothing. Mara rolled up her sleeves. She started with the floor, scrubbing it on her hands and knees with a brush she found buried under a pile of tools. She boiled water in a battered pot and used it to clean the table, the chairs, the shelves. She took the furs outside and beat the dust and filth out of them until her arms ached. She cleared the fireplace, restacked the wood, and scrubbed the stones until they no longer looked black. By the time Elias returned that evening, the cabin looked and smelled like a place where a human being might actually live. He stopped in the doorway, staring. Mara was at the stove, stirring a pot of stew she'd made from the deer meat he'd left behind. She didn't look up. "You can eat, or you can stand there," she said evenly. "Your choice." Elias didn't move for a long moment. Then he stepped inside, set his rifle down, and sat at the table. Mara ladled stew into a bowl and set it in front of him. Then she served herself and sat across from him. They ate in silence. When he was finished, Elias pushed the bowl away and looked at her with those cold, unreadable eyes. "You planning to stay?" he asked. "I already did," Mara replied. He grunted, stood, and walked out again. Mara watched him go, then returned to her work. The days that followed established a rhythm, though it was a strange, fractured one. Elias barely spoke. He left before dawn and returned after dark, sometimes with game, sometimes with nothing. He tracked mud and blood across her clean floors. He left tools everywhere. He ignored every effort she made to create order. But Mara didn't complain. She cleaned, she cooked. She chopped wood when the pile ran low, even though it took her twice as long as it would have taken him. She repaired the roof where it leaked. She patched the gaps in the walls where the wind came through. And slowly, the cabin began to change. It wasn't just clean now, it was livable. The smell of bread replaced the stench of decay. The fire burned warmer. The floors didn't creak as much. Mara had brought order to chaos, and though Elias never acknowledged it, she saw the way he paused sometimes when he came in, the way his eyes swept the room as if seeing it for the first time. One evening, after nearly 2 weeks, Elias finally broke the silence. "Why'd you come here, Shaz?" he asked. He was sitting at the table sharpening a knife. His tone was flat, but there was something underneath it. Curiosity, maybe, or suspicion. Mara was kneading dough. She didn't stop. "Same reason you're asking. I needed somewhere no one would find me." "You running from the law?" "No." "Then who?" She looked up at him, her hands still buried in the dough. "People who think I owe them something I didn't take." Elias studied her for a long moment. "You steal it." "No." "But someone did." "Yes." He went back to sharpening the knife. "Doesn't matter up here. Nobody comes to the ridge unless they're already lost." "Or unless they're looking for someone," Mara said quietly. Elias's hand stilled. He looked at her again, sharper this time. "They coming for you?" "I don't know," Mara said honestly, "but if they do, I'm not leaving." Something shifted in his expression, something almost like approval. He nodded once, then stood and walked to the door. "Then you better learn to shoot," he said, and tossed her a revolver. Mara caught it, the weight of it unfamiliar and heavy in her hands. Elias opened the door, pausing on the threshold. "Tomorrow morning, first light." Then he was gone. Mara stood there, holding the gun, her heart pounding. She looked down at it, then at the door, then back at the gun. And for the first time since she'd arrived on Dead Man's Ridge, she smiled. Looked out. Elias Creed was not a patient teacher. The next morning, he led Mara out into the clearing behind the cabin and set up a row of old tin cans on a fallen log. The sun was barely up, and the air was sharp enough to sting. "Hold it like this," he said, demonstrating. "Feet apart, arms steady. Don't close your eyes when you pull the trigger." Mara took the revolver, mimicked his stance, and fired. The shot went wide, kicking up dirt 10 feet to the left of the cans. "Again," Elias said. She fired again. Missed again. Again. She missed 6 more times before she finally clipped the edge of a can, sending it tumbling. Elias grunted. "Better." They practiced until Mara's hands were shaking and her ears were ringing. Elias didn't offer encouragement, didn't congratulate her when she hit a target. He just reloaded the gun, set up the cans again, and told her to keep going. But Mara didn't need encouragement. She needed skill. Because deep down, she knew the truth. The men hunting her wouldn't stop. And when they came, she would have to be ready. Winter arrived like a fist closing around the mountain. The snow came in waves, piling up against the cabin walls, burying the trail, sealing them in. The temperature dropped so low that the water in the bucket froze solid overnight. The wind screamed through the trees, and the world outside became a white, howling void. Mara and Elias were trapped together. At first, the silence between them was unbearable. They moved around each other like ghosts, occupying the same space but never truly meeting. Elias sat by the fire, carving wood or sharpening blades. Mara baked bread, mended clothes, read the few books she'd brought from Boston. But slowly, the silence began to change. One night, as a storm raged outside, Elias spoke. "You ever kill anyone?" he asked. Mara looked up from her book, startled. No, have you? Yes. She waited, but he didn't elaborate. Instead, he stared into the fire, his face hard and distant. How many? She asked quietly. Enough that I stopped counting. Mara closed her book. Do you regret it? Elias was silent for a long time. Then he shook his head. No, they deserved it. All of them? He looked at her, and for the first time she saw something raw in his eyes, something that might have been pain, or anger, or both. Every last one. Mara didn't press him. She simply nodded and went back to her book. But that night, the wall between them cracked just a little. As the weeks passed, they began to talk more. Not much. Elias wasn't a man of many words, but enough. Mara learned that he'd been a soldier once, that he'd fought in a war that had left him scarred inside and out. She learned that he'd come to the ridge to escape, to disappear, to become something other than human. And Elias learned that Mara wasn't running from weakness, she was running from betrayal. My brother, she said one night, her voice steady but cold. He was the only family I had left. I trusted him with everything, and he sold me out for money. You kill him? Elias asked bluntly. No, but if I ever see him again, I might. Elias nodded slowly. Fair enough. They didn't speak about it again. But from that night on, something shifted. They weren't friends, weren't even close to it, but they understood each other. They were both people who had been broken by the world and had chosen to survive in the only way they knew how. By becoming harder than the world itself. One morning, Mara woke to find Elias standing by the window, his body tense, his hand on his rifle. What is it? She asked, sitting up. Tracks, he said quietly. Fresh ones, leading up the ridge. Mara's blood went cold. Could be an animal. No. Elias's voice was flat. Too deliberate. Someone's been watching the cabin. Mara stood, her mind racing. How long? Don't know. Could be days. Could be weeks. She walked to the window and looked out. The snow was deep, unmarked except for a single line of footprints that led from the tree line toward the cabin, then back again. What do we do? She asked. Elias turned to her, his eyes hard. We wait, and if they come back, we make sure they don't leave. Mara nodded, her heart pounding. She reached for the revolver Elias had given her, checked the chamber, and set it on the table within easy reach. From that moment on, the cabin became a fortress. Elias reinforced the door, barricaded the windows, and set traps along the perimeter. Mara kept the fire low and the curtains drawn. They moved through the cabin in silence, every sound magnified, every shadow a potential threat. And they waited. But 3 days later, the attack came. It was just before dawn when Mara heard the first sound, a soft crunch of snow, too close to be an animal. She sat up, her hand already on the gun. Elias was already awake, crouched by the window, his rifle aimed at the door. How many? Mara whispered. At least 3, Elias said quietly. Maybe more. Mara's pulse hammered in her ears. She moved to the other side of the cabin, positioning herself near the fireplace where she had a clear line of sight to the door. The footsteps grew closer. Then a voice called out, smooth and cold. Mara Whitlock, we know you're in there. Come out, and no one gets hurt. Mara's stomach dropped. She recognized that voice. It was one of Victor Crane's men. Elias glanced at her, his expression unreadable. You know him? Yes. He alone? No, Crane doesn't send men alone. Elias nodded slowly, then called out in a voice like iron. She's not going anywhere, and neither are you. There was a pause. Then the voice came again, colder this time. You don't know who you're dealing with. Don't care, Elias said flatly. Turn around and leave while you still can. Laughter echoed through the trees, low, mocking. You think you can stop us, Mountain Man? We've dealt with worse than you. Elias didn't respond. He simply raised his rifle, sighted through the narrow window, and fired. The shot cracked through the air like thunder. A scream followed, and then all hell broke loose. Gunfire erupted from the trees. Bullets slammed into the cabin walls, splintering wood, shattering glass. Mara dropped to the floor, her heart racing. Elias moved with deadly precision, returning fire, reloading, firing again. He didn't waste a single shot. "Stay down!" he barked at Mara, but Mara wasn't planning to hide. She crawled to the window on the opposite side, raised her revolver, and aimed at the muzzle flash in the trees. She fired. Missed. Fired again. This time, a figure stumbled out of the shadows, clutching his shoulder. Mara's hands were shaking, but she didn't stop. She fired again, and the man went down. Elias glanced at her, something like approval flickering in his eyes. Good. The gunfire intensified. Whoever these men were, they weren't amateurs. They spread out, flanking the cabin, trying to find weak points. But Elias had prepared for this. Every window was reinforced. Every door was barricaded. And the traps he'd set in the snow were doing their work. Mara heard a scream as someone triggered one, followed by cursing and the sound of retreat. But there were still too many of them. "We can't hold them off forever," Mara said, reloading her revolver with trembling hands. "We don't have to," Elias said grimly. "Just long enough." Long enough for what? For them to realize they're not getting out of here alive. The battle raged for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Mara lost track of how many shots she fired, how many men she saw fall. Her world narrowed to the sound of gunfire, the smell of smoke, and the cold, steady presence of Elias beside her. And then, suddenly, it stopped. The silence was deafening. Mara's ears rang. Her hands ached. She was covered in sweat despite the cold. Elias moved to the window, his rifle still raised, scanning the trees. "They're pulling back. Are they gone?" "No, regrouping." Mara's stomach twisted. "How many are left?" "Don't know, but we hurt them." She looked down at the revolver in her hands, the metal warm from repeated firing. She had shot people, possibly killed them. And she didn't feel guilty. She felt alive. But the second wave came at dusk. This time they didn't bother with talk. They came hard and fast, rushing the cabin from three sides. Elias met them with controlled fury, his rifle cracking like a whip. Mara fired until her revolver was empty, then reloaded and fired again. One man made it to the door. He slammed into it with his shoulder, trying to break through. Elias shot him through the wood. The man fell and didn't move. Another tried to come through the window. Mara grabbed a cast-iron pan from the stove and swung it with all her strength, connecting with his skull. He dropped like a stone. Elias looked at her, and for the first time he smiled. It was a small, grim smile, but it was real. "You're tougher than you look," he said. "So are you," Mara shot back. And then they were fighting again, side by side, two people who had come to the mountain broken and alone, now standing together against a force that wanted to tear them apart. Well, by the time the sun set, the attackers were gone. The snow around the cabin was stained red. Bodies lay scattered in the clearing. Mara and Elias stood in the doorway, weapons still in hand, breathing hard. "They'll come back," Mara said quietly. "Maybe," Elias said, "but not tonight." He looked at her, and something passed between them, something unspoken but understood. They had survived. Together. And whatever came next, they would face it the same way. The bodies were still warm when Elias dragged them into the trees. Mara stood in the doorway of the cabin, watching him work. Her hands were scraped raw, her dress stained with blood. Some of it hers, most of it not. The revolver hung heavy at her side, and her fingers ached from gripping it so hard for so long. She should have felt horror, should have felt sick at the sight of the dead men scattered across the snow, but all she felt was a strange, cold clarity. She had crossed a line tonight. There was no going back. Elias returned from the trees, his breath misting in the freezing air. He didn't look at her as he passed, just went straight to the well and hauled up a bucket of water. He splashed his face, scrubbed the blood from his hands, then finally turned to face her. "You hurt?" he asked. "No," Mara said. "You?" "I'm fine." They stood there in the cold, the silence stretching between them like a taut wire. The moon had risen, casting everything in silver and shadow. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled. "They'll send more," Mara said quietly. "Crane doesn't give up." Elias nodded slowly. "How many men does he have?" "Enough. He owns half of Boston's underworld. Politicians, police, enforcers, everyone's in his pocket. Then why come all the way out here for you? Mara looked down at her hands. Because my brother stole $200,000 from him and made it look like I did it. Crane doesn't care about the truth. He just wants someone to pay. Elias was silent for a moment, then he walked past her into the cabin. Mara followed. Inside, the air was thick with gun smoke and the metallic tang of blood. Elias went to the fireplace, added wood, and stoked the flames until they roared to life. Then he pulled out a bottle of whiskey from a cabinet, poured 2 glasses, and handed one to Mara. "Drink," he said. Mara took it and drank. The whiskey burned going down, but it steadied her nerves. Elias drained his glass in one swallow, then set it down hard on the table. "Your brother, where is he now?" "Somewhere safe, I'm sure. Probably spending Crane's money while I'm up here fighting for my life." "You ever think about going back? Clearing your name?" Mara laughed bitterly. "With what? Evidence? Witnesses? Crane owns the courts. The moment I set foot in Boston, I'm a dead woman." Elias studied her for a long moment, his pale eyes unreadable. Then he nodded. "Then we make sure they don't take you." "We?" Mara asked, surprised. Elias's jaw tightened. "You stood your ground tonight. You didn't run. That means something." Mara's throat tightened. She hadn't expected that. Hadn't expected him to see her as anything other than another burden he had to carry. But there it was, respect, earned in blood and gunfire. "Thank you," she said quietly. Elias turned away, his expression hardening again. "Don't thank me yet. This is just the beginning." The next morning, Elias left before dawn. Mara woke to find him gone, his rifle missing from its place by the door. She sat up, her body stiff and aching from the fight. Every muscle screamed in protest as she stood, but she forced herself to move. There was work to be done. She checked the windows first, making sure the barricades were still secure. Then she swept the floor, clearing away the broken glass and splintered wood. She scrubbed the bloodstains from the floorboards until her knuckles were raw. And when she was finished, she baked bread, because even in the middle of a war, people still needed to eat. By the time Elias returned, the cabin smelled like fresh yeast and warmth. He stepped inside carrying a pair of rabbits and something else, a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. He set the rabbits on the table, then handed her the bundle. "What is this?" Mara asked. "Open it." She unwrapped the cloth and found a knife, a long, wicked-looking blade with a leather-wrapped handle. It was sharp enough to split a hair. "You know how to use one of these?" Elias asked. "For cooking, yes." "Not what I meant." Mara looked up at him. His expression was serious, almost grim. "If they get inside again," he said, "and you run out of bullets, you're going to need something close. This is it." Mara turned the knife over in her hands, testing the weight. It was heavier than she expected, but balanced. She nodded slowly. "Show me." For the next 2 weeks, Elias trained her. Every morning, before the sun was fully up, he took her outside and taught her how to fight like her life depended on it, because it did. He showed her how to hold the knife, how to strike, how to defend. He didn't go easy on her. He came at her hard and fast, forcing her to react, to think, to move. Mara fell more times than she could count. She came away with bruises, scrapes, a split lip, but she didn't complain. She got back up, gritted her teeth, and kept going. "You're too slow," Elias said one morning, circling her. "By the time you decide to move, you're already dead." "Then stop talking and come at me," Mara shot back. Elias's eyes gleamed. He lunged. Mara sidestepped, brought the knife up, and stopped just short of his ribs. Elias froze, then stepped back. A slow smile spread across his face. "Better." Mara was breathing hard, her heart pounding. But she smiled too. For the first time in her life, she felt dangerous. "Bomb!" The winter deepened, and with it the isolation. The snow piled so high that the cabin was almost buried. The trail down to Coldwater was impassable. The only sounds were the wind, the crackle of the fire, and the occasional crack of a tree branch giving way under the weight of ice. Mara and Elias fell into a rhythm. She cooked, cleaned, and kept the cabin livable. He hunted, chopped wood, and kept watch. They didn't talk much. Elias still wasn't a man of many words, but the silence between them was no longer hostile. It was companionable, comfortable even. One night, as they sat by the fire, Mara asked a question she'd been holding on to for weeks. Why do they call this place Dead Man's Ridge? Elias didn't answer right away. He stared into the flames, his face cast in shadow. Used to be a mining camp up here, he said finally. 50, 60 men. They found gold, got greedy, started killing each other for it. By the time winter was over, there was only one man left. He went mad from the isolation and walked off into the snow. They found his body come spring. Mara was quiet for a moment. And you chose to live here. Seemed appropriate. Why? Elias looked at her, and for the first time she saw something raw in his eyes. Because I was already dead. Just didn't have the sense to lie down. Mara's chest tightened. She wanted to say something, to offer comfort, but she didn't know how, so instead she just nodded. I know what that feels like, she said quietly. Elias held her gaze for a moment longer, then looked back at the fire. Yeah, I think you do. Yeah. Days turned into weeks, and something shifted between them. It started small, Elias leaving an extra blanket by her bedroll without a word. Mara setting aside the best cuts of meat for him. Little gestures that said more than words ever could. One evening, Mara was mending one of Elias's shirts when he spoke. You don't have to do that. I know, Mara said, not looking up, but it needs doing. Elias watched her work for a moment, then sat down across from her. You're not like the others. Mara glanced up. The other brides? Yeah. They were soft, scared. They didn't belong up here. And I do? Elias nodded slowly. You're still here, aren't you? Mara set the shirt aside. I didn't have a choice. Yes, you did. You could have run the first night. Could have turned around and gone back down the mountain. But you didn't. Because there was nowhere else to go. Maybe. But you stayed anyway. That takes something most people don't have. Mara felt a strange warmth spread through her chest. She wasn't used to being seen, really seen, by anyone. Her whole life she'd been invisible. The dependable one, the one who worked quietly in the background while others took the credit. But Elias saw her. Not as a burden, not as a means to an end, just as she was. Thank you, she said softly. Elias looked away, uncomfortable with the gratitude. Don't mention it. What? The attack came 3 weeks later, in the dead of night. Mara woke to the sound of footsteps on the roof. Her heart slammed into her throat. She reached for the revolver, her hands moving on instinct. Across the room, Elias was already on his feet, rifle in hand. How many? Mara whispered. Don't know, but they're trying the chimney. Mara's eyes went to the fireplace. The fire was low, just embers now. If someone dropped down through the chimney. Elias was already moving. He grabbed a pot of water, dumped it on the fire, and aimed his rifle at the opening. Get to the corner, he said. Cover the door. Mara moved quickly, positioning herself where she could see both the door and the chimney. Her pulse hammered in her ears. For a moment there was nothing but silence. Then a figure dropped through the chimney, fast, covered in soot, landing in a crouch. Elias fired. The man went down, clutching his leg, screaming. The door exploded inward. 2 more men rushed in, guns drawn. Mara didn't hesitate. She fired twice, dropping one. Elias swung his rifle like a club, catching the other across the jaw. The man staggered, and Elias finished him with a single shot. But the one from the chimney was still alive, writhing on the floor, reaching for his gun. Mara walked over, her revolver raised. The man looked up at her, his eyes wide with pain and fear. He was young, younger than she'd expected. Maybe 25. He had a thin face and dark hair matted with soot. Please, he gasped. Please, Mara pulled the trigger. The cabin fell silent. She stood there staring down at the body, the gun still smoking in her hand. Her ears rang, her hands trembled, but she didn't feel guilt. She didn't feel remorse. She felt nothing. Elias walked over, looked down at the dead man, then at Mara. You all right? Mara lowered the gun slowly. Yes. Elias nodded. He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. They spent the rest of the night cleaning up. Elias dragged the bodies outside one by one, and Mara scrubbed the blood from the floor. Again. It was becoming a ritual now. Violence, death, cleanup, over and over. By the time the sun rose, the cabin looked almost normal again. But Mara knew the truth. Normal was gone. This was her life now. She stood at the window looking out at the frozen landscape. The sky was gray, heavy with the promise of more snow. The world felt small and closed in, like the walls were pressing in on all sides. Elias came to stand beside her. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then, finally, he spoke. "You killed a man tonight." "I know." "How do you feel?" Mara thought about it, really thought about it, and when she answered, her voice was steady. "Like I did what I had to." Elias nodded slowly. "Good, because that's the only way you survive up here." Mara looked at him. "Is that how you survived? By doing what you had to?" Elias's jaw tightened. "Yeah, and a lot of people died because of it." "Do you regret it?" He was silent for a long moment, then he shook his head. "No, but I don't forget it either." Mara turned back to the window. "I don't think I'll forget this either." "You won't," Elias said quietly, "but you'll learn to live with it. Aufschwassen." The weeks that followed were strangely quiet. No more attacks came. No more footsteps in the snow. It was as if the mountain itself had swallowed Crane's men whole and left nothing behind. But Mara knew better. She knew they were still out there, watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. And she knew that when they came again, it would be worse. So she prepared. She practiced with the revolver until her aim was deadly. She sparred with Elias until she could hold her own against him. She learned to set traps, to track footprints, to read the mountain the way Elias did. And somewhere in all of that, something changed between them. It happened slowly, so gradually, that Mara didn't even notice at first. But one night, as they sat by the fire, she realized that she was no longer afraid of him. She wasn't afraid of his size, his scars, his silence. In fact, she felt safer with him than she had with anyone in her entire life. And when she looked at him, really looked at him, she saw something she hadn't expected. She saw a man who had been broken by the world, just like her. A man who had retreated into the wilderness not because he was weak, but because he was strong enough to survive alone. A man who had given up on people, until she came along and refused to leave. "Elias," she said quietly. He looked up from the piece of wood he was carving. "Yeah? Why did you let me stay?" He frowned. "What do you mean?" "You could have turned me away that first night, sent me back down the mountain. But you didn't. Why?" Elias set the carving aside. He stared into the fire for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Because you looked me in the eye," he said finally. "Most people can't do that. They look at me and see a monster, but you just saw a man." Mara's throat tightened. "You're not a monster. I've done monstrous things. So have I. Does that make me a monster too?" Elias looked at her and something softened in his eyes. "No, it makes you a survivor." Mara smiled faintly. "Then so are you." The next morning, Mara woke to find Elias standing by the window, his body tense. "What is it?" she asked, sitting up. "Someone's coming." Mara's heart jumped into her throat. She grabbed her revolver and moved to the window. In the distance, a single figure was making its way up the trail. Whoever it was, they were moving slowly, deliberately, not trying to hide. "Could be a trap," Elias said. "Or a messenger," Mara replied. They waited in tense silence as the figure drew closer. Finally, it came into view. A man, older, wearing a heavy coat and hat. He stopped about 50 yards from the cabin and raised his hands. "I'm unarmed," he called out. "I just want to talk." Elias opened the door a crack, his rifle trained on the man. "Talk from there." The man nodded. "My name is Arthur Pelham. I work for Victor Crane. He sent me to deliver a message." Mara's stomach twisted. She stepped forward, standing beside Elias. "What message?" she demanded. Pelham reached into his coat, slowly, carefully, and pulled out an envelope. He held it up. "He's willing to make a deal," Pelham said. "You come back to Boston, stand trial, and he'll make sure you're treated fairly. No violence, no retribution." Mara laughed bitterly. And I'm supposed to believe that? Pelham shrugged. Mr. Crane is a businessman. He'd rather settle this peacefully. He's a liar and a murderer, Mara shot back. And I'm not going anywhere. Pelham sighed. I thought you might say that. He tucked the envelope back into his coat. Then I have another message. If you don't come willingly, Mr. Crane will send every man he has to bring you back. And when they come, they won't stop until this entire mountain is burned to the ground. Elias stepped forward, his voice like ice. Tell Crane to send as many men as he wants. They'll die, just like the others. Pelham looked at Elias for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I'll deliver the message. But you should know Crane doesn't lose, ever. Neither do I, Elias said flatly. Pelham turned and started back down the trail. Mara and Elias stood in the doorway, watching him go. When he was out of sight, Mara let out a shaky breath. He's going to come for us, with everything he has. Elias nodded. I know. We can't fight an army. We don't have to fight an army. We just have to survive long enough for them to give up. Mara looked at him. And if they don't give up? Elias's expression was hard, unyielding. Then we make them wish they had. Og. That night, they fortified the cabin like never before. Elias reinforced every window, every door, every weak point. He set traps in a wide perimeter around the cabin, tripwires, pits covered with snow, deadfalls rigged to collapse. He stockpiled ammunition, sharpened every blade, and mapped out escape routes. Mara worked alongside him, her hands moving with grim efficiency. She cooked enough food to last them weeks. She filled every container they had with water. She prepared bandages, medicines, anything they might need if they were trapped inside for days. And when the work was done, they sat by the fire, exhausted but ready. You ever think about what happens after? Mara asked quietly. Elias looked at her. After what? After this. After Crane. Assuming we survive. Elias was silent for a long moment. Then he shook his head. I stopped thinking about after a long time ago. Why? Because there's never been an after, just more of the same. Mara studied his face in the firelight. Maybe that's because you've been alone. Elias met her gaze, and something passed between them, something fragile and unspoken. Maybe, he said quietly. Mara reached out and placed her hand on his. His skin was rough, scarred, warm. Elias stared down at their hands, then slowly turned his palm up and closed his fingers around hers. They sat like that for a long time, not speaking, just holding on. And for the first time in longer than either of them could remember, they didn't feel alone. The first real thaw came 3 days later, and with it, a sense of dread that settled over the ridge like fog. Mara stood at the window, watching the snow melt in slow, heavy drops from the cabin roof. The ice that had locked them in for months was finally breaking, which meant the trail down the mountain was becoming passable again. That also meant Crane's men could reach them. Elias was outside, checking the traps. She could see him moving through the trees, a dark figure against the white landscape, methodical and relentless. He'd barely slept in the past 3 days, and when he did, it was sitting upright in a chair with his rifle across his lap. Mara turned away from the window and went back to the stove. She'd made coffee, thick, bitter, strong enough to strip paint. She poured 2 cups and waited. When Elias came back inside, his face was grim. 2 traps triggered, he said, shaking snow from his coat. No bodies. They're testing our defenses. Mara handed him a cup. How close? 1/4 mile. Maybe less. He drank the coffee in 3 long swallows, then set the cup down hard. They're circling, trying to find the weak spots. Are there any? Elias looked at her, and for a moment she saw something she'd never seen in him before. Doubt. There's always weak spots, he said quietly. We just have to make sure they're the ones who find them first. Mara nodded, her jaw set. Then let's give them something to find. Over the next 2 days, they turned the cabin into a labyrinth of deception. Elias rigged false trails that led to deadfalls and concealed pits. He set up decoy positions that looked like defensive points but were actually traps. He even constructed a fake cache of supplies just far enough from the cabin to draw men out into the open. Mara worked on the interior. She reinforced the walls with extra timber, created firing positions at every window, and set up a secondary barricade inside the cabin in case the outer defenses failed. She also prepared something else, an escape route through the floor, hidden beneath a rug and a pile of firewood, that led to a shallow crawl space under the cabin. If everything went to hell, they'd have one last way out. On the third night, as they sat by the fire cleaning weapons, Elias spoke. "If things go bad tomorrow—" "They won't," Mara interrupted. "If they do," Elias continued, his voice firm, "you take that tunnel and you run. You don't look back. You don't wait for me." Mara's hand stilled on the revolver she was cleaning. "I'm not leaving you. You will if I tell you to." "No." Mara set the gun down and looked him straight in the eye. "I didn't stay on this mountain just to run the first time things get hard. We stand together, or we fall together. That's how this works." Elias stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then something shifted in his face, something that might have been pride or gratitude, or both. "You're the stubbornest woman I've ever met," he said. "Good thing you like stubborn," Mara replied. The corner of Elias's mouth twitched. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was close. They went back to cleaning their weapons in silence, but the air between them felt different now. Warmer, closer. That night, Mara couldn't sleep. She lay on her bedroll, staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind and the creak of the cabin. Her mind churned through 1,000 scenarios, each one worse than the last. She thought about Crane, about her brother, about all the ways this could end in blood and fire. "You're thinking too loud," Elias said from across the room. Mara turned her head. He was sitting in his chair, rifle across his lap, his eyes gleaming in the darkness. "Can't help it," she said. "Thinking doesn't change what's coming." "I know, but it helps me prepare." Elias was quiet for a moment. Then he stood, walked over and sat down on the floor beside her bedroll. It was such an unexpected gesture that Mara didn't know what to say. "When I was a soldier," Elias said quietly, "the night before a battle, we used to tell stories, kept our minds off what was waiting for us in the morning." "What kind of stories?" "Anything. Didn't matter if they were true or not, just something to hold on to." Mara shifted, propping herself up on one elbow. "Tell me one." Elias looked at her, and for a moment she thought he'd refuse, but then he leaned back against the wall and began to speak. "There was a man in my unit. Name was Thomas Reed. Fastest runner I ever saw. Could outrun a horse if he had to. One time we were pinned down by enemy fire, ammunition running low, no way out. Reed volunteered to run back to camp, 3 miles through hostile territory, to get reinforcements." "Did he make it?" Mara asked. Elias nodded slowly. "He made it, came back with 50 men, and saved all our lives. But he took a bullet in the leg on the way back. Damn near bled out before we could get him to a surgeon. What happened to him?" "He lived. Lost the leg, though. Last I heard, he was running a tavern in Philadelphia." Elias's voice softened. "He was the bravest man I ever knew, not because he wasn't afraid, but because he ran anyway." Mara was quiet for a moment, absorbing the story. "You miss him?" "Every day." "Why didn't you stay in touch?" Elias looked away. "Because men like me don't get to keep the good things. We just borrow them for a while." Mara reached out and placed her hand on his arm. "You're wrong." Elias looked down at her hand, then back at her face. "Am I?" "Yes. You deserve good things just as much as anyone else." "I've killed people, Mara. A lot of people." "So have I now. Does that mean I don't deserve good things either?" Elias didn't answer. He just stared at her, something raw and uncertain in his eyes. Mara squeezed his arm gently. "We're not defined by the worst things we've done. We're defined by what we choose to do next." Elias was silent for a long time. Then, slowly, he placed his hand over hers. "I hope you're right," he said quietly. They sat like that for a while, neither of them speaking, just holding on to each other in the darkness. And when Mara finally fell asleep, it was with Elias still sitting beside her, keeping watch. The attack came at dawn. Mara woke to the sound of gunfire, distant at first, then closer. She was on her feet in seconds, revolver in hand. Elias was already at the window, rifle raised. "How many?" she asked, moving to her position. "At least a dozen. Maybe more." His voice was calm, controlled. They're coming from the east and south, trying to box us in. Mara's heart hammered, but her hands were steady. She'd been preparing for this. They both had. The first wave hit the outer traps. Mara heard the screams, sharp, sudden, cut off. Elias's traps were doing their work, but there were too many of them. For every man who fell, 2 more took his place. They're pushing hard, Elias said, firing 3 shots in quick succession. This isn't a probe, this is the real thing. Mara fired through her window, aiming at the muzzle flashes in the trees. She didn't know if she hit anyone, but the gunfire from that direction stopped for a moment. Then something crashed through the window on the north side. A bottle, trailing flame. Fire! Mara shouted. Elias spun, grabbed a blanket, and smothered the flames before they could spread. But another bottle came through the south window, and another through the east. They were trying to burn them out. Mara and Elias moved like a well-oiled machine, putting out fires, returning gunfire, covering each other's blind spots. The cabin filled with smoke. Mara's eyes burned, her lungs screamed, but she didn't stop. A figure appeared at the broken window. Mara shot him before he could climb through. Another came from the opposite side. Elias caught him with the butt of his rifle, then finished him with a single shot. But they kept coming. "We can't hold them," Mara shouted over the gunfire. "We don't have to hold them forever," Elias shouted back. "Just long enough." "Long enough for what?" "For this." Elias grabbed a rope hanging from the ceiling, one Mara hadn't noticed before, and pulled hard. Outside, a massive deadfall trap triggered. Mara heard the crash, the screams, the chaos. Elias had rigged an entire section of trees to collapse on anyone who pushed too close to the cabin's west side. The gunfire slowed. The attackers were regrouping, reassessing. Mara and Elias used the lull to reload, to catch their breath, to prepare for the next wave. "That bought us maybe 5 minutes," Elias said. His face streaked with soot and blood. "When they come again, they'll be smarter." "Then we'll be smarter too," Mara said. Elias looked at her. And despite everything, the smoke, the blood, the death, he smiled. "Yeah, we will." The second wave was worse. They came from all sides at once, coordinated and brutal. Mara fired until her revolver clicked empty, reloaded with shaking hands, and fired again. Elias was a force of nature beside her, moving from window to window, firing with mechanical precision. But the cabin was falling apart. The walls were splintered. The roof was starting to collapse in places. Fires burned in 3 corners, and the smoke was so thick Mara could barely see. And then, through the chaos, she heard a voice. "Mara Whitlock!" She froze. That voice. She knew that voice. "Mara, I know you can hear me." It was her brother. Mara moved to the window, her hands trembling with rage. Through the smoke and the trees, she could see him, standing just out of rifle range, flanked by 2 armed men. He looked the same as he had in Boston. Same slicked-back hair, same expensive coat, same smug expression. "Thomas," she whispered. Elias appeared beside her, his rifle trained on Thomas. "That him?" "Yes." "Say the word and he's dead." Mara wanted to say it. Every fiber of her being screamed for her to give the order, to watch her brother fall, to see justice done. But something held her back. Thomas raised his hands in a mock gesture of peace. "I just want to talk, sister." "We've got nothing to talk about," Mara shouted back. "I think we do. Mr. Crane is willing to forgive everything if you just come back with me. No trial, no prison. You walk away clean." "You're a liar. I'm giving you a chance to live, Mara. Take it." Mara's finger tightened on the trigger. "You sold me out. You stole from Crane and made me take the fall. And now you want me to trust you." Thomas's smile faltered. "It was business, Mara. Nothing personal." "Nothing personal?" Mara's voice cracked with fury. "You destroyed my life. You sent killers after me. And you call that business?" "You were always too soft for this world," Thomas said coldly. "I did what I had to do to survive, just like you're doing now, so stop pretending you're better than me." Mara felt something break inside her. All the anger, all the betrayal, all the pain she'd been carrying for months, it erupted like a volcano. "I am better than you," she said, her voice steady and cold. "Because when I had nothing, I built something. And when you had everything, you burned it down. You're not my brother anymore. You're nothing." Thomas's expression darkened. "Fine, If you won't come willingly, we'll drag you out." He gestured to his men, and the gunfire resumed, harder, faster, more desperate. Elias pulled Mara back from the window. "We need to move. Now." They retreated to the center of the cabin, taking cover behind the barricade Mara had built. The walls were coming apart. The roof was burning. The air was unbreathable. "The tunnel," Elias said, pulling aside the rug. "Go." "Not without you," Mara said. "I'll be right behind you." Mara hesitated, then nodded. She dropped into the tunnel, crawling through the tight space beneath the cabin. Behind her, she could hear Elias firing, buying her time. She emerged on the north side of the cabin, hidden by the smoke and the trees. She turned, waiting for Elias. He didn't come. Mara's heart stopped. She started to go back, but then she heard it, the crack of a rifle, followed by Elias's roar of pain. "Elias!" she screamed. She ran back toward the cabin, not caring about the bullets, not caring about anything except getting to him. She found him just outside the tunnel entrance, clutching his side. Blood seeped through his fingers, dark and thick. "You're hit!" Mara gasped, dropping to her knees beside him. "I'm fine," Elias growled, but his face was pale. "You're not fine. We need to move." "Can't. Too many of them." Mara looked around. He was right. Crane's men were closing in from all sides. They were trapped. But Mara wasn't done fighting. She helped Elias to his feet, half carrying him toward the trees. Behind them, the cabin exploded as another firebomb found its mark. The heat was intense, the light blinding. They made it to the tree line, collapsing behind a fallen log. Mara tore a strip from her dress and pressed it against Elias's wound. "Stay with me," she said. "Not planning on going anywhere," Elias muttered, his voice weak. Mara reloaded her revolver, her mind racing. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and Elias was badly wounded, but they were still alive. And as long as they were alive, they could fight. Footsteps crunched through the snow. Mara raised her gun, ready to fire. But the figure that appeared wasn't one of Crane's men. It was a woman, tall, lean, with sharp eyes and a rifle slung over her shoulder. She was followed by 3 men, all armed, all moving with the practiced ease of soldiers. "Elias Creed?" the woman called out. Elias lifted his head, his eyes narrowing. "Who's asking?" "Name's Catherine Vale. I run the settlement 20 miles north of here. We heard the gunfire." "And?" "And we don't like outsiders bringing their wars to our mountains, especially not city bastards who don't know how to respect the land." She looked at Mara, then back at Elias. "You need help or not?" Elias and Mara exchanged a glance. "We need help," Mara said. Catherine nodded. "Then let's finish this." She raised her rifle and fired, dropping one of Crane's men before he even knew she was there. Her companions followed suit, and suddenly the tide of the battle shifted. Crane's men, caught between Elias's traps and Catherine's ambush, began to fall back. They weren't prepared for a fight on 2 fronts. They'd expected an easy kill, not a full-scale war. Mara used the chaos to drag Elias deeper into the trees, away from the burning cabin. Catherine's people covered their retreat, firing with ruthless efficiency. By the time the sun was fully up, Crane's men were in full retreat, fleeing down the mountain like the devils themselves were chasing them. Catherine walked over to where Mara and Elias were hidden, her rifle still smoking. "They'll be back," she said bluntly. "Men like that always come back." "I know," Mara said, "but not today, and maybe not for a while." Catherine looked at Elias. "You're bleeding out. We've got a doctor back at the settlement. Can you ride?" "I can do whatever I have to," Elias said through gritted teeth. Catherine grunted. "Good. Let's move before they regroup." Mara helped Elias to his feet, and together they followed Catherine and her people through the trees. Behind them, the cabin burned, collapsing in on itself, sending smoke spiraling into the gray sky. Mara didn't look back. She kept her eyes forward, her arm around Elias, her mind focused on one thing: survival. They'd lost the cabin, they'd lost their home, but they were still alive, and that meant they could still fight. The settlement was nothing like Mara had expected. It was a collection of rough cabins and structures built into the side of a mountain, hidden so well that you could walk past it and never know it was there. The people who lived there were hard, wary, and armed to the teeth. They looked at Mara and Elias with suspicion, But Catherine's words seemed to carry weight. "Take him to Doc Miller," Catherine ordered, gesturing to Elias. "And get the woman some food and water. She looks like she's been through hell." "I have," Mara said quietly. Catherine studied her for a moment, then nodded. "You'll fit in here just fine." They took Elias to a small cabin where an old man with steady hands and sharp eyes cleaned and stitched his wound. Mara sat beside him the entire time, holding his hand, refusing to leave even when the doctor told her to. When it was done, Elias was pale and weak, but alive. "You're lucky," the doctor said, washing his hands. "Another inch to the left and you'd be dead." "Story of my life," Elias muttered. The doctor snorted and left them alone. Mara pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down, exhaustion crashing over her like a wave. Her hands were shaking, her body ached, her mind felt like it was coming apart at the seams, but Elias was alive. "You should rest," Elias said, his voice rough. "So should you." "I will. But first I need to know, are you all right?" Mara laughed, a broken, bitter sound. "I don't even know what that means anymore." Elias reached out and took her hand. His grip was weak but steady. "It means you're still here. Still fighting. That's all that matters." Mara looked down at their joined hands, her throat tight. "I saw him, Thomas. My brother. And I wanted to kill him." "Why didn't you?" "Because I wanted him to see me survive. I wanted him to know that everything he did to me, it didn't break me. It made me stronger." Elias squeezed her hand. "Then you won." Mara met his eyes, and for the first time in weeks she felt something other than fear and anger. She felt hope. "Maybe," she said softly. "But this isn't over." "No," Elias agreed. "It's not. But we're still standing, and as long as we're standing, we can fight." Mara nodded, her resolve hardening. "Then let's make sure we're ready when they come again." That night, as Elias slept, Mara sat by the window watching the dark shapes of the mountains against the sky. Somewhere out there, Thomas and Crane's men were regrouping, planning their next move. But Mara wasn't afraid anymore. She'd faced death and come out the other side. She'd lost everything and found something worth fighting for. And when the next battle came, and she knew it would, she'd be ready. Because she wasn't the scared, broken woman who'd stepped off that stagecoach months ago. She was Mara Whitlock, the Iron Bride of Dead Man's Ridge, and she would not fall. Elias woke 3 days later with clarity in his eyes and strength returning to his limbs. The wound in his side was healing, though it still pulled when he moved too quickly. Mara had barely left his side, sleeping in the chair beside his bed, waking at every sound, every shift in his breathing. "You look terrible," Elias said, his voice still rough but stronger than before. Mara looked up from the bowl of stew she'd been stirring. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her hair hung loose and tangled around her face. "You don't look much better." "Fair enough." Elias pushed himself up to sitting, wincing at the pain but refusing to show it. "How long have I been out?" 3 days. The doctor said you needed rest." 3 days is long enough. We need to move." "You can barely sit up." "I can do more than sit up." Elias swung his legs over the side of the bed, gritting his teeth against the pain. "And I need to talk to Catherine, find out what she knows." Mara set the bowl down and moved to his side, ready to catch him if he fell. But Elias stood on his own, swaying slightly but holding steady. "Stubborn," Mara muttered. "Takes one to know one," Elias replied. They found Catherine in the settlement's main hall, a large structure built from logs and stone that served as meeting place, trading post, and fortress all at once. She was sitting at a long table cleaning a rifle, surrounded by maps and papers. She looked up when they entered, her eyes sharp and assessing. "You should still be in bed," Catherine said to Elias. "I've been in bed long enough. We need to talk." Catherine gestured to the chairs across from her. "Sit before you fall over. You're no good to anyone dead." Elias sat, and Mara took the seat beside him. Catherine studied them both for a long moment, then set her rifle aside. "I'll tell you what I know," Catherine said. "But first, you tell me what you brought to my mountain. Who are these men, and why do they want you dead badly enough to burn down half the ridge?" Mara took a breath, then told the story. She told Catherine about Boston, about her brother's betrayal, about Victor Crane and the $200,000. She told her about the men who'd come, the battles they'd fought, the cabin they'd lost. Catherine listened without interrupting, her expression unreadable. When Mara finished, Catherine leaned back in her chair and was silent for a long moment. "Victor Crane," Catherine said finally. "I've heard the name. He's got reach, that one. Owns half the politicians on the East Coast, they say. Not the kind of man who forgives a debt." "I know," Mara said. "That's why I ran." "And your brother? Where's he now?" "Down the mountain somewhere, with whatever's left of Crane's men." Catherine nodded slowly. "They've pulled back to Coldwater, set up in the old mining office, been buying supplies, hiring locals as guides. Word is they're planning another run at you, but they're being smarter about it this time." Elias's jaw tightened. "How many?" 20, maybe 25 men, well-armed, well-paid, and your brother's leading them." Mara's hands clenched into fists. "Thomas doesn't know the first thing about fighting. He's a coward who hides behind other men's guns." "Maybe so," Catherine said, "but he's got those guns pointed at you, and he's got Crane's money behind him. That makes him dangerous whether he can fight or not." "What about the law?" Mara asked. "Can't the marshal do something?" Catherine laughed, a harsh sound. "The marshal in Coldwater? He's on Crane's payroll. Has been for years. You won't get help from him." Elias leaned forward, his voice low and hard. "Then we don't ask for help. We take the fight to them." Catherine raised an eyebrow. "You can barely walk, and you want to attack 20 armed men?" "I don't want to. I need to. They're not going to stop. Every day we wait, they get stronger. They bring in more men, more guns. If we don't hit them now, we'll be fighting on their terms. And if you hit them now, you'll be fighting outnumbered 5-1. I've had worse odds." Catherine studied him for a long moment, then looked at Mara. "What about you? You ready to walk into a fight you might not walk out of?" Mara met Catherine's gaze without flinching. "I stopped running the day I came to this mountain. I'm not starting again." Catherine's lips curved into a small, approving smile. "Good, because I hate watching people run." She stood, walking to the window. "I'll help you, but not out of charity. These city bastards have been causing problems for everyone up here. They're scaring off game, threatening locals, acting like they own the place. I want them gone as much as you do." "What are you offering?" Elias asked. 10 of my best fighters, weapons, supplies, and knowledge of the terrain. In exchange, when this is over, you leave Coldwater alone. No revenge killings, no burning down the town. You take out Crane's men and your brother, and then you disappear. Deal?" Elias looked at Mara. She nodded. "Deal," Elias said. Catherine extended her hand, and Elias shook it. Her grip was iron. "We move in 3 days," Catherine said. "That gives you time to heal and us time to plan. But when we go hard and we go fast. No second chances." "Understood," Elias said. Over the next 3 days, the settlement transformed into a war camp. Catherine's fighters were seasoned, tough people who'd carved lives out of the brutal Wyoming highlands through sheer will and violence. They knew the mountains better than anyone, and they moved through the terrain like ghosts. Mara trained with them, learning their tactics, their signals, their methods. She was already a competent shot, but Catherine's people taught her how to fight as part of a unit, how to communicate without words, how to move as one deadly organism. Elias, despite his injury, pushed himself relentlessly. He worked with Catherine to plan the attack, studying maps of Coldwater, identifying weak points, planning contingencies. His tactical mind was sharp, honed by years of war, and Catherine respected him for it. On the second night, as Mara sat cleaning her revolver, one of Catherine's fighters, a young woman named Sarah with a scar across her cheek, sat down beside her. "You ever killed someone before you came here?" Sarah asked bluntly. Mara looked at her. "No, you?" 5 times. 4 deserved it. 1 didn't, but he drew on me first, so that's life." Sarah studied Mara's face. "You've got the look now, the one people get when they've crossed over." "Crossed over?" "From the ones who can't kill to the ones who can. It changes you, makes you harder, but it also makes you free in a way. You stop being afraid of what you might become, because you already are it." Mara was quiet for a moment. "Do you regret it?" Sarah shrugged. Regrets for people who have the luxury of choice. Up here, you do what you have to do to survive. Everything else is noise. Mara nodded slowly, understanding. She'd become one of them now, a survivor willing to do whatever it took to protect what mattered. That night, Elias found her sitting outside the cabin, looking up at the stars. He sat down beside her, moving carefully, his hand pressed against his side. "You should be resting," Mara said. "So should you." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the night air cold and sharp. "I've been thinking about what happens after," Elias said quietly. "After we deal with Crane's men. After your brother." "What about it?" "The cabin's gone. Dead Man's Ridge isn't safe anymore. We'll need somewhere else to go." Mara turned to look at him. "Are you saying you want to leave?" "I'm saying we might not have a choice. This place—" He gestured to the dark mountains around them. "It was never meant to be a home. It was meant to be a grave I hadn't died in yet." "And now?" Elias looked at her, and in his eyes, Mara saw something she'd never expected to see: vulnerability. "Now I've got a reason to want something better," he said. Mara's throat tightened. "Elias, I'm not good with words," he continued, cutting her off. "Never have been. But I know this. Before you came, I was just waiting to die, going through the motions, and then you showed up, stubborn and tough and refusing to quit, and you reminded me what it feels like to be alive." Mara reached out and took his hand. "You saved my life. You saved mine first." They sat there, hands joined under a sky full of stars, and for a moment the war and the violence and the fear all fell away. "When this is over," Mara said softly, "we'll find somewhere new. Somewhere we can actually live instead of just survive." Elias squeezed her hand. "I'd like that." On the third day they rode out. Catherine led 15 fighters down the mountain toward Coldwater, moving in silence through the pre-dawn darkness. Elias and Mara rode side by side, their weapons loaded, their minds focused. The plan was simple: hit the mining office where Crane's men were holed up, eliminate the threat, and get out before reinforcements could arrive. They reached the outskirts of Coldwater just as the sun began to rise. The town was quiet, still asleep. Catherine split her fighters into 3 groups. One would create a distraction on the south end of town. One would block the main road to prevent escape. And the third, including Elias, Mara, and Catherine herself, would assault the mining office directly. "Remember," Catherine said quietly as they prepared to move, "we're not here to take prisoners. We're here to end this. Fast and clean." Mara checked her revolver one last time, then nodded. Beside her, Elias raised his rifle, his face a mask of cold determination. They moved through the empty streets like shadows. The mining office was a 2-story structure at the edge of town, windows dark, doors barricaded. Smoke rose from a chimney, indicating people inside. Catherine raised her hand, counting down silently. 3, 2, 1. The distraction team opened fire on the south end of town, drawing attention. Shouts echoed through the streets. Crane's men began to mobilize, rushing toward the gunfire. That's when Catherine's team struck. They breached the mining office with brutal efficiency. The door came down with a battering ram, and Catherine's fighters poured inside, weapons blazing. Mara followed, her revolver raised, her heart pounding but her hand steady. Inside, chaos erupted. Crane's men scrambled for weapons, caught off guard by the sudden assault. Mara fired twice, dropping a man who'd raised a shotgun. Elias moved beside her, his rifle cracking like thunder, each shot finding its mark. The fighting was close, brutal, and fast. Mara found herself face to face with a man twice her size. He swung at her with a knife. She dodged, brought her revolver up, and fired point blank. He fell. Catherine fought like a demon, her rifle a blur of motion, her movements precise and deadly. Her fighters moved with her, a coordinated unit that overwhelmed Crane's disorganized men. In less than 5 minutes, it was over. Bodies lay scattered across the floor. The air was thick with gun smoke and the copper smell of blood. Mara stood in the center of the room, breathing hard, her revolver still raised. And then she heard a voice from the stairs. "Mara." She turned. Thomas stood at the top of the staircase, a pistol in his hand. He looked terrified, his face pale, his hand shaking, but the gun was pointed at her. "Don't," Mara said, her voice cold. "I don't want to shoot you," Thomas said, his voice cracking, but I will if I have to." "You don't have to do anything. Just put the gun down." "I can't." "Crane, he'll kill me if I don't bring you back. You don't understand what he's capable of." "I understand perfectly. You sold me to save yourself, and now you're going to die for it." Thomas's hand shook harder. "We're family, Mara. You can't just—" "You stopped being my family the day you betrayed me," Mara said, raising her revolver. "Now put the gun down or I'll drop you where you stand." For a moment they stared at each other, brother and sister, separated by blood and betrayal. Then Thomas's finger tightened on the trigger. Mara fired first. The shot caught Thomas in the shoulder, spinning him around. He dropped his pistol, clutching the wound, screaming. Mara walked up the stairs slowly, deliberately. She stood over him as he writhed on the floor, blood seeping through his fingers. "Please," Thomas gasped. "Please, Mara. I'm sorry. I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did," Mara said quietly. "You meant every bit of it. You just didn't think I'd survive long enough to make you pay." She raised the revolver, pointing it at his head. Thomas stared up at her, his eyes wide with terror. "You're not a killer, Mara. You're not like me." "You're right," Mara said. "I'm not like you. Because when I pull this trigger, it'll be for justice, not greed." Her finger tightened on the trigger. But she didn't fire. She stood there, the gun aimed at her brother's head, every muscle in her body screaming to finish it, to end him the way he'd tried to end her. But she couldn't. Not because she was weak, not because she was afraid, but because she realized in that moment that killing Thomas wouldn't give her peace. It would just make her more like him. She lowered the gun. "You're not worth it," she said quietly. "You're going to live with what you did, every day, every night, for the rest of your miserable life. And that's a worse punishment than death." She turned and walked back down the stairs. Elias was waiting at the bottom, his rifle still smoking. "He alive?" "For now," Mara said. "You sure about that?" Mara looked back up the stairs where Thomas was still sobbing, clutching his shoulder. "I'm sure. Let him crawl back to Crane and explain how he failed. That's punishment enough." Catherine approached, wiping blood from her knife. "We've got 3 survivors. What do you want to do with them?" "Send them back to Boston," Mara said. "Tell them if Crane sends anyone else after me, they'll end up the same way." Catherine nodded. "Consider it done." They left Coldwater as the sun rose higher, riding hard for the settlement. Behind them, smoke rose from the mining office. The message had been sent, written in blood and fire. But as they rode, Mara felt something she hadn't felt in months. Freedom. She'd faced her brother. She'd faced Crane's men, and she'd won. Not by becoming a monster, but by becoming something stronger. Someone who knew when to fight and when to walk away. When they reached the settlement, Catherine pulled her aside. "You did good down there," Catherine said. "Better than good. You've got a place here if you want it, both of you." Mara looked at Elias, who was dismounting carefully, his wound clearly bothering him but his face determined. "Thank you," Mara said. "But I think we need to find our own place, build something that's ours." Catherine smiled. "I figured you'd say that. You're not the settling type. Neither of you." She pulled a folded piece of paper from her coat and handed it to Mara. "There's a valley about 40 miles north of here. Good land, water, sheltered. Nobody owns it, and nobody goes there because it's too remote. But for people like you, it might be perfect." Mara unfolded the paper. It was a hand-drawn map showing the route to the valley. "Why are you giving us this?" Mara asked. "Because you earned it, and because I like the idea of someone like you and Elias carving out a life up here. The mountains need more people who can't be broken." Mara's throat tightened. "Thank you." Catherine nodded, then walked away, barking orders at her fighters. Mara walked over to Elias, who was leaning against a fence post, his face pale but his eyes bright. "Look at this," she said, showing him the map. Elias studied it, then looked up at her. "You want to start over? Build a new place?" "I want to build something that's ours," Mara said. "Not a fortress, not a hiding place, a home." Elias was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Yeah, I think I'd like that." They spent 2 more days at the settlement, resting and preparing. Catherine's people provided them with supplies, tools, seeds, livestock, everything they'd need to build a new life. On the morning they left, Catherine walked them to the edge of the settlement. "You ever need anything?" Catherine said. "You know where to find me." "Same to you," Elias said. Catherine smiled, then turned and walked back into the settlement without looking back. Mara and Elias rode north, following the map, into the wild, uncharted heart of the mountains. The journey took 3 days, through terrain so rough and remote that Mara understood why no one had claimed it. But when they reached the valley, she understood why Catherine had given it to them. It was beautiful. A wide green valley nestled between two mountain peaks, with a clear stream running through the center. Trees lined the edges, and the land was flat enough to farm but wild enough to feel free. "This is it," Mara said, dismounting. "This is home." Elias looked around, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw him smile. Really smile. "Yeah," he said quietly. "It is." They set up camp that night beside the stream, and as they sat by the fire, Mara felt something she hadn't felt in years: peace. "We're going to make it," she said softly. Elias took her hand. "We already did." And under a sky full of stars, in a valley no one knew existed, two people who'd been broken by the world began to build something new, something that was theirs, something that no one could take away. The first cabin they built together took 6 weeks and looked like it had been assembled by people who'd learned carpentry from watching trees fall. The walls leaned slightly to the left, the roof sagged in the middle, and the door didn't quite fit the frame. But it was theirs, built with their own hands from timber they'd cut themselves. And when they finally moved in, Mara stood in the center of the single room and felt something she'd almost forgotten: pride. "It's not much," Elias said, surveying their work with a critical eye. "It's everything," Mara replied. They spent the spring planting beans, potatoes, wheat, whatever seeds Catherine had given them. Mara had grown up in a city, and Elias had spent years living off what he could hunt, so neither of them knew the first thing about farming. They learned by trial and error, mostly error. Half their crops died. The chickens they'd brought kept escaping. The cow they'd traded for was stubborn and mean. But slowly, impossibly, things began to grow. The valley came alive with green, the stream ran clear and cold, and every morning Mara woke to birdsong instead of gunfire, to the smell of earth instead of smoke, to Elias's steady breathing beside her instead of silence. They didn't talk much about the past. There was an unspoken agreement between them that what had happened on Dead Man's Ridge belonged to another life, another version of themselves. They were different people now, building something new from the ashes of what they'd lost. But the past had a way of refusing to stay buried. It came in the form of a rider, 3 months after they'd settled in the valley. Mara was working in the garden, pulling weeds, when she heard the sound of hooves. She straightened, her hand instinctively going to the revolver she still wore at her hip. Old habits died hard. Elias emerged from the tree line where he'd been hunting, his rifle already raised. They moved together without speaking, positioning themselves between the approaching rider and the cabin. The rider came into view, a single man on a tired-looking horse, wearing a dusty coat and a wide-brimmed hat. He raised his hands when he saw the weapons pointed at him. "Easy," he called out. "I'm not here to fight." "Then state your business and move on," Elias said, his voice flat and dangerous. The man dismounted slowly, keeping his hands visible. He was older, maybe 50, with a weathered face and gray-streaked beard. He looked exhausted. "My name's Jacob Mercer. I'm a federal marshal out of Denver. I'm looking for Mara Whitlock." Mara's blood went cold. She didn't lower her weapon. "Why?" Mercer pulled a folded document from his coat, moving carefully. "I have news. About Victor Crane." Elias's finger tightened on the trigger. "Whatever you're selling, we're not buying." "I'm not selling anything, just delivering information." Mercer held out the document. "Crane's dead. Killed 2 months ago in Boston. Federal investigation finally caught up with him. Turns out half the evidence they needed was in his own ledgers, including proof that Thomas Whitlock embezzled the money and framed his sister." Mara's hand trembled. "What?" "Your brother confessed everything when Crane's organization started falling apart. He's in federal custody now, awaiting trial. The charges against you have been dropped. You're a free woman, Miss Whitlock. Officially. The words didn't make sense at first. Mara had lived so long with the weight of being hunted, being wanted, being guilty in the eyes of the law, that freedom felt like a foreign language. Why should we believe you? Elias asked. Mercer gestured to the document. Read it yourself. It's all there. Official pardon, signed by a federal judge. Your name's been cleared. Mara took the paper with shaking hands and unfolded it. The legal language was dense, but the meaning was clear. All charges dismissed, full pardon granted, reputation restored. She read it twice, then a third time, her eyes blurring with tears she didn't realize she was shedding. It's real, she whispered. Elias lowered his rifle and moved to her side, reading over her shoulder. His jaw tightened. Crane's really dead? Shot by one of his own men during a raid, Mercer said. Turns out loyalty bought with fear doesn't last when the fear's gone. The whole organization collapsed within weeks. Mara looked up at the marshal, her voice barely above a whisper. And Thomas? Like I said, federal custody. He'll stand trial for embezzlement, fraud, conspiracy. He's looking at 20 years minimum. Mercer's expression softened slightly. I know it doesn't erase what he did to you, but it's something. Mara was silent for a long moment, processing. Justice. Real justice. Not the kind she'd imagined, bloody and violent, but the kind that came from truth finally being heard. Thank you, she said quietly. Mercer nodded. There's one more thing. The money your brother stole. Most of it was recovered. Since you were named in the original case, you're entitled to compensation. The court set aside $50,000 for you. Payment for damages, lost wages, suffering. It's waiting in a Denver bank whenever you want to claim it. $50,000. It was more money than Mara had ever seen in her life. Enough to do anything, go anywhere, be anyone. She looked at Elias. He was watching her, his expression unreadable. What will you do? Mercer asked. Mara folded the document carefully and tucked it into her pocket. Then she looked around at the valley, the cabin they'd built, the garden she'd planted, the stream that ran clear and cold through land that felt like home. I'm going to stay right here, she said. Mercer raised an eyebrow. You could go back to Boston. Start over. Live comfortable. I am comfortable, and I already started over. Mara looked at Elias again, and he nodded slightly. This is where I belong. Mercer studied her for a moment, then smiled faintly. Fair enough. I'll file the report. If you change your mind about the money, send word to the Denver Marshal's office. They'll know how to reach me. He mounted his horse, tipped his hat, and rode back the way he'd come. Mara and Elias stood in silence, watching him disappear into the trees. When he was gone, Mara let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. You really want to stay? Elias asked quietly. Do you want me to leave? No, but I want you to choose this because it's what you want, not because you're still running. Mara turned to face him fully. I'm not running anymore. I haven't been for a long time. I'm here because this is home. Because you're here. Because I'd rather have this. She gestured to the imperfect cabin, the struggling garden, the wild valley around them, than anything Boston could offer. Elias's expression softened. He reached out and took her hand. Then we stay. Together, Mara added. Together, Elias agreed. That night, they celebrated with whiskey Catherine had given them and a dinner of roasted rabbit and the first vegetables from their garden. They sat outside under the stars, the fire crackling between them, and for the first time in either of their lives, they talked about the future without fear. We should expand the cabin, Elias said. Add another room, maybe 2. Planning on needing the space? Mara asked, a smile playing at her lips. Elias looked at her, and something warm flickered in his eyes. Maybe, if you are. Mara's heart squeezed. They'd never talked about it explicitly, about what they were to each other, about what they might become, but the implication hung in the air between them, fragile and precious. I think I'd like that, Mara said softly. Elias nodded slowly, then stood and extended his hand. Come here. Mara took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. They stood close, the firelight dancing across their faces. "I'm not good at this," Elias said. "Words, feelings, any of it." "I know. But I need you to know." He paused, struggling. "You saved me. Not just from dying on that ridge, from being dead while I was still breathing. And Mara placed her hand on his cheek, silencing him. "I know. I feel the same way." Elias leaned down and kissed her. It was gentle at first, tentative, like they were both afraid of breaking something precious. But then Mara wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back, and the kiss deepened, becoming something fierce and certain and real. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Elias rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. It wasn't a question, it was a statement, simple and direct, pure Elias. Mara laughed, a sound of pure joy. Yes. They were married 3 weeks later in Catherine's settlement, with half the mountain folk in attendance. Catherine herself officiated, reading from a battered book of common law, and when she pronounced them married, the celebration that followed was loud, raucous, and lasted until dawn. Mara wore a simple dress she'd made herself, and Elias wore his cleanest shirt. They exchanged no rings, neither of them had any, but they spoke vows they'd written themselves, promising not perfection or ease, but partnership through whatever storms came. When they returned to their valley, they returned as husband and wife, and the cabin that had felt temporary suddenly felt permanent. They expanded it, just as Elias had suggested, adding a second room and a proper kitchen. They built a barn for the animals and a workshop for Elias's woodworking, and as summer turned to fall and fall to winter, the valley became truly theirs. But peace, Mara learned, was not the same as safety, and the past, no matter how thoroughly you thought you'd buried it, could still claw its way to the surface. The second attack came in early winter, just after the first snow. Mara was in the barn, feeding the chickens, when she heard the sound of gunfire. Her blood turned to ice. She grabbed the rifle they kept hidden in the hay and ran toward the cabin. Elias was already outside, taking cover behind the woodpile, returning fire at figures in the trees. There were 4 of them, maybe 5, all armed. Mara took position at the corner of the cabin and fired, dropping one of the attackers. The others scattered, taking cover. "Who are they?" Mara shouted. "Don't know," Elias called back, "but they're not amateurs." The gunfight was brief but brutal. These men weren't Crane's people. They moved differently, fought differently. They were professionals, hired guns. Mara and Elias had the advantage of knowing the terrain, knowing where to take cover, where to position themselves. One by one, the attackers fell or retreated until only silence remained. Mara approached one of the fallen men carefully, her rifle raised. He was still alive, gasping, clutching a wound in his chest. "Who sent you?" she demanded. The man coughed blood, his eyes glazing. "Doesn't matter. You're marked." "By who?" "Crane's nephew, Logan. He's coming for you. Won't stop until you're dead." The man's eyes went vacant, and he was gone. Mara stood over the body, her mind racing. Crane's nephew. She'd never heard of him, never knew he existed, but apparently he knew about her. Elias appeared at her side, breathing hard. "We need to find out who this Logan Crane is, before he sends more." That night, they sent word to Catherine. She arrived 2 days later with information that made Mara's stomach turn. "Logan Crane," Catherine said, spreading papers across their table. "Victor's younger brother's son. He was in Europe when his uncle died, running some kind of shipping operation. When he came back and found out what happened, he swore revenge. Blames you for destroying the family business." "I didn't destroy anything," Mara said. "His uncle did that himself." "Doesn't matter to him. You're the reason Crane's empire fell, and he wants blood." Elias studied the papers. "How many men does he have?" "Unknown, but he's got money, lots of it, and connections. He could send 5 men or 50, and he won't stop until you're dead or he is." Mara felt the familiar weight settle back onto her shoulders, the weight of being hunted, of never being safe. She'd thought it was over. She'd thought she was free. "What do we do?" she asked quietly. Catherine looked at her, then at Elias. "You've got 3 choices. Run and keep running for the rest of your lives. Wait here and hope you can kill everyone he sends. Or what? Elias asked. Catherine's expression was grim. You go to Denver, you find Logan Crane, and you end this permanently. Mara's hands clenched into fists. You mean kill him? I mean make sure he can't hurt you anymore. However that needs to happen. Elias was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked at Mara. Your choice. I'll back whatever you decide. Mara thought about it. She thought about the life they'd built, the peace they'd found, the home they'd made. And she thought about how all of it would be ash if Logan Crane had his way. She'd spent months running from violence, then months fighting it. And now, when she finally had something worth protecting, the violence had come for her again. But this time, she wasn't going to wait for it to arrive. We go to Denver, she said. They left the valley under cover of darkness 3 days later, leaving everything they'd built behind. Catherine agreed to watch over the property while they were gone, and she provided them with contacts in Denver, people who could help them find Logan Crane. The journey took 5 days through increasingly difficult terrain. When they finally reached Denver, Mara was struck by how foreign it all felt. The crowds, the noise, the smell of industry and humanity packed too close together. After months in the wilderness, civilization felt suffocating. They found lodging in a small boarding house and began asking questions. It didn't take long to learn that Logan Crane was staying at the Stratford Hotel, the finest establishment in Denver, conducting business like the legitimate businessman he pretended to be. He's got guards, Elias reported after scouting the hotel. At least 6, maybe more. Professional, well-armed. We can't just walk in there. Then we make him come to us, Mara said. How? Mara thought for a moment, then smiled grimly. We give him what he wants. Me. Elias's face darkened. Absolutely not. Listen, we send him a message. Tell him I want to meet, to negotiate. He'll jump at the chance. He thinks I'm some scared woman hiding in the mountains. He won't expect a trap. And if you're wrong, if he just kills you on sight, then you'll be there to make sure he doesn't. Mara placed her hand on Elias's arm. I trust you, and this is the only way to end it without spending the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders. Elias was silent for a long moment, his jaw working. Finally, he nodded. All right, but we do it my way, with backup. They spent the next 2 days planning. Catherine had given them names of people in Denver who owed her favors, former soldiers, hunters, people who lived on the edges of society and knew how to fight. Elias recruited 4 of them, enough to even the odds. The message was delivered to Logan Crane the next morning. Mara Whitlock wanted to meet. Neutral ground, the old warehouse district near the river, sunset. Crane's response came within hours. Agreed. As the sun began to set, Mara stood in the center of an abandoned warehouse, her heart pounding but her hands steady. The space was huge, cavernous, with broken windows letting in shafts of dying light. Perfect for an ambush, from either side. Elias and his recruited fighters were hidden in the rafters and behind crates, weapons ready. Mara stood alone in the open, waiting. Logan Crane arrived exactly on time. He was younger than Mara expected, maybe 30, with his uncle's sharp features but none of the hardness. He looked like someone who'd grown up wealthy and cruel, someone who'd never been told no. He walked in flanked by 6 armed men, all of them alert, all of them dangerous. Logan stopped about 20 feet from Mara, his eyes scanning her with cold assessment. So you're the woman who destroyed my family, he said. His voice was smooth, educated, dripping with contempt. I didn't destroy anything, Mara said. Your uncle did that himself. I was just trying to survive. And my uncle's dead because of you, his empire gone. My inheritance stolen. Your uncle was a criminal who got what he deserved. Logan's expression hardened. Perhaps. But that doesn't change the fact that you need to pay. An eye for an eye. Blood for blood. Is that why you're here? To kill me yourself? No, I don't dirty my hands with such things. Logan gestured, and his men raised their weapons. I'm here to watch. Then watch this, Mara said. She raised her hand, the signal. Elias and the others opened fire from their hiding spots. Logan's men scattered, returning fire, but they were caught in a crossfire with nowhere to go. It was over in seconds. Logan dove for cover behind a crate, drawing his own pistol. Mara was already moving, circling around, her revolver raised. She found him crouched behind a pile of old machinery, his face pale, his gun hand shaking. "It's over," Mara said, her weapon trained on his head. "Your men are dead. It's just you and me now." Logan looked up at her, and she saw fear in his eyes. Real, genuine fear. He wasn't his uncle. He was just a spoiled rich man playing at being dangerous. "You're going to kill me," he said, his voice breaking. "I should," Mara replied. "You sent men to kill me, tried to destroy the life I built, threatened the person I love. Give me one reason why I shouldn't." Logan was silent, his gun lowering. "I can give you money," he said desperately. "More than you can imagine. We can call this even. You go your way, I go mine." Mara stared at him, this pathetic man trying to buy his way out of consequences. And she realized something. He wasn't worth it. Killing him wouldn't bring her peace. It would just make her like him, like his uncle, like everyone who thought violence was the answer to everything. "I'm not going to kill you," Mara said quietly. She lowered her gun. "But you're going to leave Denver tonight, and you're never going to come after me again. If you do, I won't be this merciful a second time." Logan nodded frantically. Yes, I swear. You'll never see me again." "And one more thing," Mara added. "You're going to put it in writing, a signed confession that you sent men to murder me, something I can use if you ever break your word." "Done. Anything. Just let me go." Mara gestured with the gun. "Then write." With shaking hands, Logan pulled out paper and pen from his coat and wrote out the confession. Mara took it, read it, then folded it carefully and put it in her pocket. "Now go," she said, "and if I ever hear your name again, I'll make sure it's in a wanted poster." Logan scrambled to his feet and ran, stumbling over debris, disappearing into the night. Elias appeared beside Mara, his rifle still smoking. "You let him go." "I did." "Why?" Mara looked at the confession in her hand. "Because I'm done living in blood. We've fought enough, killed enough, survived enough. It's time to just live." Elias was quiet for a moment. Then he lowered his rifle and nodded. "Yeah, it is." They left Denver that night and didn't look back. The journey home felt different this time, lighter somehow, as if they'd finally shed the last weight holding them down. When they crested the ridge and saw their valley spread out below them, Mara felt tears spring to her eyes. Home, real home, earned through blood and pain and refusing to quit. Catherine was waiting for them at the cabin, sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee. "You two look like hell," she said by way of greeting. "We feel like hell," Elias replied, dismounting stiffly. "But we're done," Mara added. "It's over, really over." Catherine studied them, then nodded slowly. "Good. You both deserve some peace." They spent that night around the fire, telling Catherine everything that had happened. When they finished, she raised her cup in a toast. "To surviving," she said. "To surviving," Mara and Elias echoed. Catherine left the next morning, and Mara and Elias were alone again in their valley. They spent the winter rebuilding what had been damaged, strengthening what had been weakened, and planning for spring. And when spring came, they planted twice as much as before. The valley bloomed with life. Vegetables, wheat, wildflowers that Mara had planted just because they were beautiful. The chickens multiplied. The cow finally got pregnant. The cabin, once rough and crude, became comfortable and warm. One evening in late summer, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains, Mara felt Elias take her hand. "I've been thinking," he said. "About what?" "About those 2 extra rooms we built." Mara turned to look at him and saw something she'd rarely seen in his eyes, nervousness. "What about them?" she asked gently. "I think we should fill them, eventually, if you want." Mara's heart swelled. She squeezed his hand. "I want." Elias smiled, a real, genuine smile that transformed his scarred face into something beautiful. "Good. Because I think I'd like to be a father, if I can figure out how." "You'll figure it out. We both will. Together." And so they did. Their daughter was born the following spring, during a gentle rain that turned the valley green and lush. They named her Catherine, after the woman who'd helped them survive. She had Mara's dark hair and Elias's pale eyes, and when she cried, it was with the lungs of a mountain lion. 2 years later, their son arrived, quiet, thoughtful, with his father's serious expression even as a baby. They named him Thomas, not after Mara's brother, but to reclaim the name, to give it new meaning. The children grew up wild and free, learning to track from their father and to bake from their mother. They learned to shoot, to plant, to survive. But more than that, they learned to love, fiercely, completely, without reservation. And the valley that had once been empty became filled with life and laughter and the sound of family. Years passed. The legend of Elias Creed and Mara Whitlock spread through the mountain communities, the iron pair who'd fought off armies and built a fortress of family where others had found only wilderness. People spoke of them with respect, with awe, sometimes with fear. But Mara and Elias didn't care about legends. They cared about the garden that needed weeding, the roof that needed patching, the children who needed raising. They cared about the quiet moments, morning coffee on the porch, evening walks by the stream, nights spent in each other's arms. They had found what they'd been searching for without knowing they were searching. A place to belong, people to belong to, a life worth living instead of just surviving. And when, decades later, travelers occasionally found their way to the valley and asked about the couple who lived there, they were told the same thing. Those are the Creeds. They came to these mountains with nothing but scars and stubbornness, and they built something that would outlast them. They're proof that you can be broken by the world and still find a way to be whole again. That even in the hardest places, love can take root and grow. That home isn't a place you find. It's something you build with the people who refuse to let you fall. And on quiet nights, when Mara and Elias sat together watching their grandchildren play in the valley they'd claimed, they knew the truth. They hadn't just survived. They had won.